This is Dish and Dirt with Gary Pickren, South Carolina's only podcast dedicated to the real estate agent craft. And now, the host of Dish and Dirt,
welcome back
Gary
everyone to another
Pickren.
episode of Dish and Dirt. I'm your often opinionated but rarely wrong host, Gary Pickren, coming to you from the beautiful downtown Columbia, South Carolina offices of Blair, Cato, Pickren, Castelline. This, the fourth week of July 2025. Quick show for you today, because what we're going to do today is we're going to review the Real Estate Commission guidelines on advertising. We have issued some guidelines at the Real Estate Commission recently. One just came out in June talking about advertising and some of the issues that the Real Estate Commission is seeing. We're going to talk about that. But before we get into the guideline letter, I want to throw a couple of dates at you so you can go ahead and put these on your calendar. You know, our Sumter office is already open. We're already doing closings in Sumter 5 days a week, and we're really excited to be in that Sumter community. But we are going to have an open house grand opening for our spot in Hardy Cove, and that will be on August 20th. If you're in the Sumter area, go ahead and put August 20th on your calendar for an open house. We'll send you a lot more information out coming soon. Spartanburg, as you'll remember, we moved from the downtown area to the west side of Spartanburg, and our grand opening, or our open house, I should say, will be on August the 12th. And then in Greenville, we are open and running in the Commons. Commons is just an incredibly beautiful space. We're so excited to be in that area. You should go to the Commons just to eat lunch and see how neat of an area that whole Unity Park, Commons, Swamp Rabbit Trail, all that stuff is. But we will be having our grand opening there on August 21st. And then Myrtle Beach, we are in temporary space now. It looks like our space should be done here at the end of July, 1st of August, but we will have our grand opening on October 2nd in Myrtle Beach. We have a lot of grand openings and open houses coming up. Put those on your calendar, check our social media, listen to this podcast, and we'll continue to update you on those times and dates as we get closer. Now, let's go ahead and get our show rolling today, because we do want to go ahead and get over this guidance letter that the Real Estate Commission has issued. And I'm really proud of the work that the Real Estate Commission has done and is doing on these guidance letters. You know, when I first joined the Real Estate Commission, I thought we were very reactive and not very proactive. And one of the things I was hoping to see some change in was a more proactive commission. And I believe that we're there now, and that's due mainly to the leadership of Andy Lee and John Reinhardt, who are our past two presidents. John is the current president, Andy is the previous, recognizing that we could be more proactive and less reactive. Prior to being on the commission, the only way that the Real Estate Commission would get involved in anything would be as a result of a grievance. And then we would opine, and then no one would read the order, and it would just go nowhere. And so what would happen there is you would have to have a member of the public being harmed before we could step in. We've now taken a little bit different approach, which is to issue these guidance letters. Our idea is that if we can educate real estate agents before a person is harmed, then that does a lot of good. That prevents somebody from being harmed. That keeps a real estate agent from getting in trouble, having a blemish on their license. And that is kind of what we've undertaken, is we're taking all of the complaints and issues that we see that brought before the Real Estate Commission, whether it's from the Realtors Association alerting us, a broker alerting us, or a member of the public alerting us. We look at all of these items and determine that these are items that we need to notify the public about, notify real estate agents, and to do some better education on them. And so that's what the Real Estate Commission has done. The commission has done an excellent job, in my opinion, of writing these guidance letters. I must do a major shout out to Brandy Duncan. She is our advice counsel who pens most of these opinions for our review and approval. And she's just done an outstanding job. And it's a team effort there, from the commission to the staff to Brandy, making sure that we cover these issues. And there's a lot of issues that have already been covered, and a lot more to be covered, because we are in the midst of writing a couple of more. So we'll continue to update you here on Dish and Dirt as these come in. So today the issue is the unauthorized use of listing and property imagery. And we've talked a lot about this before on Dish and Dirt. It continues to be problematic. And this guidance letter was issued here in June of 2025. And it does cover some particularly everyday type of examples that the commission continues to receive a lot of complaints on. The guidance letter begins with kind of a general statement. And what it says is the commission has received an increasing number of complaints and inquiries related to the unauthorized use of listing and property imagery by licensees who are not affiliated with a listing brokerage. My comment here goes back to about a year or two ago when I was talking to Andy Lee about this. We spent almost an hour on the phone. I was looking at it from the standpoint that the best marketing is much marketing. And if I have a listing and you want to go take pictures of it and post it on your social media, what do I care? Because I will get a buyer because you're posting it to your clients and your circle of influence, and that's going to help me. Why does a real estate agent get all bent out of shape because some other real estate agent posted their picture on social media? Andy has a different view on it, and I believe and accept a lot of what he says. Is that when a seller hires somebody to list that property, they're not just hiring somebody to put in the in the multiple listing service. They're actually hiring you to do all of the social media and the marketing and the advertising, the promoting of the property. They have liked what you have told them and what your philosophies are on how to do that. Once they have decided that this is what they want to do, but whether you're doing Matterport or whether you're doing videos at night, whatever you're doing, that is the picture that they want to present of their house. And when somebody else just rolls in and takes an iPhone picture, that is not the pictures that they want out, creating that first image. One of the examples being, of course, is that you could have some beautiful property that you have spent a lot of money with drone videos and lighting and all this good stuff, and then post all that on social media and on the multiple listing. And then another real estate agent drives by with an iPhone, takes a picture on trash pickup day when there's a lot of yard debris on the curb. And there's Miss Old Johnson walking down the street with curlers, a nightgown, walking a poodle, smoking a cigarette that has, it's got an inch long ash on it. That's not the first picture that that owner wants of their house out on the social media. When you look at it from that standpoint, is that the seller is losing control of who's marketing and how they're marketing, it makes sense that there should be some guidance on there. Again, I want people to market as much as they can for everybody. Quite frankly, the larger amount of people looking at the house, the better. But I do understand and accept that we need to be able to control, as the listing agent, as the seller, what exactly is being put out to the public. The purpose of this letter is simply to remind real estate agents that there are laws on advertising, and those fall under South Carolina Code 4057-135E, and that is going to reinforce what the commission's expectations are when you conduct yourself both in the legal compliant manner as well as professionally respectful. There's two components here that the commission is looking at: the legal compliant, professional respectful. And we'll look at the statute together, 4057-135E. We go back before we get to that statute and look again at the rationale on the actual limitation of the advertisement. And what the commission says is when you have improper marketing of listings, whether it's social media, websites, video content, print material, telephone calls, or even direct communications, that can interfere with the professional relationships, aka agency. It can mislead the public into thinking that you're the listing agent or that you have the authority to speak on behalf of the seller. And it does undermine that legal representation framework that the property owners have entered into between the real estate brokerage firm and themselves. And they're the ones who choose the person that represents them. The seller is the one who chooses the one who has the right to speak on behalf, which is why we have agency. The seller cannot lose that right and that ability to control that message. And when everybody under the sun is allowed to post pictures and comments and take credit for the property, it does negate the owner's ability to control and select who they want to have as their representation. That is actually very good rationale behind why we have this listing limitation. And I think this is very important that the commission did this in this report, because as I've said many times, it's one thing to understand that we have a law and what the law says, but to understand the why, it makes people understand and want to follow the law. Because once it makes sense as to why we're doing it or why we're making this change, then people are a lot more likely to buy in. So I applaud Brandy once again for putting this rationale in there so that everybody knows why we have this law. It's not just everybody's trying to be difficult and protect their commissions. That's not what that's about at all. It's about protecting the seller's rights. Now let's look at the statute. What does our statute say? We got 4057-135E, and it says a licensee may not advertise, market, or offer to conduct a real estate transaction involving real estate owned in whole or in part by another person without first obtaining a written listing agreement between the property owner and the real estate brokerage firm with whom the licensee is associated with. In order to market or advertise anybody's property except your own, you have to have that signed listing agreement. And then we added this statement in 2024 because this was becoming an issue in 2017, writing of the law, is that if your owner of real estate is not required to sign a sublease agreement involving real estate, if, that's a key word, if the lease allows for subletting. And what this was, and we had a commissioner, David Lockwood, who's no longer a commissioner now. He finished his term, but he is a great commercial real estate agent. He was talking about how if you read the statute on its face, then in order to sublease a property, even if it says you may do so in your lease, you've got to go back to the owner of the property to get them sign the listing, which made no sense. And so we added this in here. If you're a commercial agent, just make sure in the actual listing agreement that it allows for subletting. And if it does, then you don't have to have the owner of the property sign the listing agreement. You can actually have the tenant. That was very important that that was added. Now, the second aspect of this is licensees not associated with a listing brokerage firm may advertise that real estate owned by another person, but there's two ways of doing that. Two things that have to happen. One is only if they have written authorization from the listing brokerage firm. So you've got to ask the agent. And secondly, acknowledge the listing brokerage firm in the advertisement in a clear and conspicuous manner. It's not just good enough to get their verbal approval. You have to get written approval. And in getting written approval, it can be an email or a text, but you need to make sure that that's kept in your records in case that file is ever audited. If it's an email, you're going to keep all your files electronically, make sure you keep that in an electronic file, or print it off and put it in your hard file so that in case you're ever audited on that file or there's ever a complaint on the file, you'll have your backup information there. And then secondly, you have to acknowledge the listing brokerage firm. So two things you have to do when you're marketing somebody else's property like that is you got to give the knowledge that they are the listing brokerage firm. ABC is the listing brokerage firm, and you work with XYZ. So you have to have both your firm and their firm. Because remember, you can't market yourself or your property without giving your information as to who you work with. And same thing for the listings. Now there's going to be two firms identified in a advertisement of somebody else's property. So let me give you an example. I see your property, you've got it listed, I drive by it, and I take a picture on my cell phone. I want to put that picture on my social media to say, if you want to take a look at it, give me a call and I'll show it to you. I have to get the listing agent in writing to say that's fine to use that particular picture and to post that. And then I have to put in that post that the listing is theirs and that who I work for. So I got to have two different brokerages listed in that social media. So it's very important that you follow that. Now, with the footnotes, and whenever you see these opinions, be sure to look at the footnotes as well. And in this opinion, Brandy put a really good footnote about MLS rules and regulations are governed independently, not by our state law, and those must be followed in addition to the state law. Our memo is not interpreting MLS rules in any form or fashion, but reaffirms that your listing content has to comply with state law. So what she's very brilliantly telling you there is you got two things you may have to comply with, and actually three. Number one, you got to comply with state law. You have to follow the advertising rules and laws 40-57. Secondly, your MLS may have certain rules that says what you can and cannot do. And then thirdly, if you're a realtor, which 60-something% of you are, you may have to follow the Realtors Association rules as well, your code of ethics. You could have three things you've got to make sure that you're doing. Be sure when you are advertising, you're following all three sets of rules. And that's an excellent thing that Brandy put there. Now, the second aspect of the statute 40-57-135E is section 2. And it says when you're advertising real estate services or marketing real estate owned and held by another person, the licensee must identify the full name of the real estate brokerage which you work with. You got to make sure that, as I said, the brokerage that has the listing, but then you have to fully identify your brokerage. And the good news is, though, if you're advertising on the internet or some type of social media, you can meet this criteria, this requirement, by simply putting a link in the advertisement to the homepage of your brokerage firm. You could also do that for the listing. You say listing offered by and put the link for that company. And then you could put, I am associated with this firm and put that down as well. If there's a trade name, you have to identify the full name of the brokerage. What I think we're getting at here is if you're KW or Keller Williams, you've got to use the full name. You've got to say Keller Williams Palmetto or Keller Williams Upstate or Keller Williams Greenville, Western, whatever all the different names are. I don't remember them all, but you have to put that full thing. You can't just say Century 21, ERA, Wilder Realty. You can't just say ERA, Remax Summit. You have to put that full name and not just the franchise. Be careful on your marketing. You don't just put Keller Williams or a KW or C21 or CBU or whatever. Make sure that you're putting that full name. Now, once the commission finished this aspect of citing the law and telling you the rationale and the purpose of it, it then got into some common examples. They call these the common unauthorized practices that you need to avoid. And again, you need to avoid them for some very important reasons, because they're illegal. And if you don't avoid them and you get a grievance filed against you, you can find yourself having an action against you. And I'm telling you guys, you don't want to be before the real estate commission. It costs money. It takes time. It's embarrassing. And the last thing you need is have some order issued against you when your clients are searching you up to find information about whether or not you're the agent for them. The first thing they see is in the matter of your name. And typically most of those orders end with you're either incompetent or improper in your acts, and nobody wants that. You don't want to have any of that up against your record. You want to make sure you're following these things. The good news is they're very easy to follow, and I think most of them are common sense, but here the commission, particularly Brandy, has set out some really good examples. Item number one is advertising another broker's active listing without their written consent. And what she says here is, even if no imagery is used, you're simply writing, you're just simply referencing a property address in any form. This includes your social media captions, and that's very important. She's going to give you an example here. You got to be very careful about these social media captions. You can't use them as clickbait. You've got to be very careful of that. Your blogs, your newsletters, your printing advertisement, your postcard, even buyer success reels, they have some limitations to those. Your marketing updates in the form of any type of advertisement. You got to be careful how you're doing these marketing updates. Unless you're the listing broker or you have received compliant written authorization from the listing broker and the owner, certain activity is going to be prohibited under 135E. Now, the good news about getting property owner consent is that consent can be given in the listing agreement to the broker who's listing the property to allow other people to do it. Most of your listing agreements allow that the agent has the right to allow other people to do things of this nature. So we got to be very careful. But the main part here I want to make sure you're clear on is 135 is when you are listing the broker's firm, it's got to be clear and conspicuous. You can't just put their name there. You need to be as clear as the listing broker is blank, or this listing provided at the courtesy of blank. Okay. Make sure you're very clear and it's conspicuous. Let's look at why this matters. And she gives 3 reasons this matters. Number one is the seller has given a single brokerage the exclusive right to determine how best to market and advertise this house. Being that the seller, the consumer, has selected who they want to represent them, they have the right to rely on that person and only that person to make those determinations of marketing and advertising. I agree with that 100%. Number 2 is these unauthorized references, whether it's a text, a picture, whatever, can create public confusion about who has the right to represent the parties and represent the property. And it could lead many consumers to make decisions based on incorrect information, incorrect assumptions that you are the listing agent, that what you say is binding the seller, which it is not. They may even decide to have you represent them because they think they can receive some discount because you represent both sides, which you don't. They need to understand the truth and be transparent, the transparency of what the transaction's about. And it does create public confusion if we're not very clear. I've had a lot of agents before this complain, that makes this person look like they're the listing agent. I'm the listing agent. What are they doing? I understand and agree with that. And then thirdly, it interferes with the agency relationship. I've done multiple podcasts over the last couple of months about you need to be careful about interfering with somebody's agency agreements. And this is a way that you can inadvertently interfere with agency. Basically, be sure you're following the agency rules, because when you don't, it undermines trust in the relationship as well as the fair and lawful use of a real estate transaction. We want to make sure that we're not doing that. Now, there's 2 examples in here. She says sharing another broker's social media post for the property without obtaining compliant written authorization. This is a little bit concerning to me. I think if you like it, that's fine. I think if you forward it to somebody else, that's fine. I think if you capture it and repost it and add written material or change some of the pictures, that's a problem. That certainly is a problem. I don't necessarily have a problem with you forwarding a post that somebody posted about a property to somebody else, or liking it or commenting on it. I think that's all perfectly fine. I think the problem is if you take that post and use it for yourself and repost it in a manner and change the writing and so forth, that's a problem. Creating marketing material derived from the MLS data. If you're using the IDX feed, remember under the MLS, you all have IDX rights, and you can use the IDX feed for your brokerage website, for your personal website and stuff like that. I still am a little bit concerned about using MLS data, such as their pictures, to post that on social media. I think that's really getting very close to the edge there. I've had the opinion that you could take the pictures from MLS, post them, and then write what you want, as long as you're crediting everybody. I still think that's problematic. I still think in best practice would be to get the permission of somebody, because I truly think the IDX feed is truly about feeding to a website that post properties for sale. And it's not about marketing or advertising. And when you look at social media, it truly looks like marketing and advertising. Just be very, very careful about how you're using this MLS data on social media or any type of marketing materials. I think you're better off just not doing it unless you have permission. At a minimum, I think if you got to take exactly what the MLS has and post that out there and give credit to the listing agent, and then the fact that you're not the listing agent. But boy, that's a very, very thin line there to get up against. I think you need to be very, very careful with that moving forward. All right, the second example we have here is failing to clearly identify the listing broker in advertisement, even when permission is granted. And so what we're seeing is that the broker has allowed you to take that picture of that property there in Spartanburg over there in Shadow Lakes, and you post that picture up there, and you don't follow through with the second part of the statute, which is given clear identification of who has the listing. In order to be compliant with 4057-135, if you have a listing in Shadow Lakes in Spartanburg and you say, yes, Gary, you can take a picture of the house with your cell phone and post it on social media, I'm perfectly fine with that. I still have to make sure it's clear that you are the listing agent and I am not. And you got to make sure that is document that I have where you say I can do it is kept in my records, and that I have made sure without a doubt that everybody knows you are the listing agent. I need to give your full broker's name. I can't just say Jane Doe is the listing agent. I have to say Jane Doe at ABC Realty is the listing agent. Got to have that full real estate broker's name, and your full real estate broker's name needs to be there as well. And again, Brandy gets into why does it matter? Again, public can incorrectly assume that you're the listing agent and that you can bind the seller by your comments. It erodes transparency and trust in these transactions. And the public just has a right to know who has been lawfully designated to represent the property owner. And it's oftentimes very confusing, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. She gives an example very similar that I think this is something I have seen that needs to be worked on. You work for ABC Real Estate and you want to share another broker's social media post about a property, and you go and get written permission to do so. You ask them, can I do this? And they're like, absolutely. You got to copy that email and you put it in your file. So you are in compliance. And then you put, while creating the post for sharing social media, you title it, quote, wow, look at this beautiful property just listed by XYZ Real Estate. Call me at ABC Real Estate if I can help you set up a tour of this gem. That would be permissible. It is very clear who the listing agent is and where they work. It's also clear that you are not the listing agent and that you are basically setting up to help buyer. What would be problematic, however, is if the caption said, wow, look at this beautiful property. Call me at ABC Realty if you want to see it. That gives the impression that you at ABC Realty have the listing when the listing is truly in the name of XYZ Real Estate. The captions can get you as in much trouble as the picture, as the write-up. Make sure we're not doing clickbait. Make sure that you're very clear on those captions. Now, moving over to number 3, the third way that people are violating these rules is using property information for self-promotion without authorization. This is problematic. We're going to talk about a couple of examples here in a second. What we have is property-related information such as using images, video, data, location, drone footage, remarks, can't be used for branding or for promotional purposes without the written permission from the listing broker and the property owner. Again, the property owner can be given through the listing agreement. While the MLS data is governed by its own rules, you still have to comply with our law on advertising. Why does this matter here? Again, it can lead to misrepresentation of your roles. When you're using somebody else's property to promote yourself, it can give the appearance that you have the right to speak on behalf of that seller, to bind that seller, and that just could mislead the public into thinking you are, in fact, the one in charge of that listing, which you're not. So you got to be careful. Now, here's a couple of things before I get into her examples that I have seen at the Real Estate Commission, okay? One, I represented this agent well before I was a commissioner. And this was a real estate agent who was simply standing in a nondescript kitchen. It was white with white countertops, white walls, white cabinets, the most nondescript kitchen ever seen. And this real estate agent said, I'm out being a boss today, showed 6 properties already, writing 2 contracts. The person that had that listing knew that he had gone in the house and simply didn't like the agent. They filed a grievance saying that he doesn't have permission to use my property for promotional reasons and he's advertising and marketing the property. I successfully defended that real estate agent because my argument was it was the most nondescript kitchen in the world. It could have been a Zoom background for all we know. It could have been a condominium in Bangladesh. There's no way that anybody looking at that could have in any way known where the property was or who the seller was, or at all believe that this real estate agent was trying to represent that seller. It was not advertisement of the property. It was advertisement of himself but it wasn't even anything to do with that particular property that was ascertainable. Now, had he been sitting in front of maybe outside the house, let's say he's standing at his car taking a video of himself, and you can see the whole house behind you, and I'm here in Sumter County, and I'm really knocking it out today, showing houses like this one behind me. People who know that house would 100% know that house is for sale. And then they would have the reason to believe that maybe you are the listing agent. That is problematic. And I hope y'all can see the differences there. One was doing self promotion, using a house where you could clearly see where the house was and whose it was. And the other one was a nondescript kitchen. Two completely different things. And so we have to use our common sense on this. Now, with that said, we had a hearing a couple of months ago at the commission in the upstate where you had a multi-million-dollar property, and the real estate agent, who was new and didn't know better, she showed up with her marketing team to shoot some videos of this multi-million-dollar property. And she was going to walk through the property, take videos of herself, and promote herself as being a big agent. The problem was when she opened the door to go in the house, the owner was there, and it scared the owner. And the owner wasn't happy and told her to leave the property, and then called the listing broker. And the agent had a grievance filed against her, and she got in trouble for multiple reasons, because she didn't follow the guidelines in the MLS, which the seller agent had clearly said, do not show house without getting permission from the seller first. You have to have a pre-approval letter and all this other stuff. She didn't follow the instructions there. But then secondly, she was using the property for self-promotion without permission of the parties. The fact that she's walking through this multi-million-dollar property, you got pictures from the outside, clear pictures from the inside that would be very easy to ascertain what the property address is. It was a very important and very impressive house. That could not be done, should not be done. Now, had she been standing in a kitchen again that had, right in front of a wall that you really couldn't tell why she's showing the listing, and just said, hey, I'm here showing the listing with my client, and there's no way to tell where the property is, who owns the property, or any distinguishing features, I think that would have been okay. Again, this gets back to why it matters. It misrepresents your role and could lead people to believing that you're the person who actually has the listing. Moving over to number 4, the fourth way that we talk about the advertisement rules can be violated was misrepresentation of involvement in a transaction, such as we sold this home, secured for our buyers, or closed with our team, should only be used when advertising brokerage has a direct and documented role in the transaction. You can't market that you had anything to do or involved in a transaction if you weren't the one involved in the transaction. Quite frankly, I don't care if your brokerage did it. If you weren't related to it at all, you shouldn't be trying to take credit. Let's say I work at a big Coldwell banker, for example, and somebody in my office sells this $2 million house. I don't think you should be out there saying, look, another closing we did. We is not the royal we. That would be the agent at Coldwell Banker who did it, that you just happen to work at the same company for. I think we, when you talk about what you sold and what you secured and what you closed, it needs to be related to you and not somebody else. This other aspect of this is, do you have to have seller permission? I think that once you get the property under contract or it's closed, to me, I don't have as much heartburn with that for you to say, got this under contract for my client, because you're not marketing and advertising the property at that point. You're marketing and advertising the services, and you're not trying to sell the property because you already have it under contract. You certainly aren't trying to market it to somebody else when it's your client that's going to get closing it and you're going to get paid for. I don't have as much problem with that. Also, totally don't have a problem with, once it's closed, you doing all the marketing you want. Another property in Spring Valley closed by my team. Certainly you can do that, because the person you need permission from wasn't the seller. They don't own the property more, but your buyer who does. And you would never should market anything without asking your client's permission to do something like that. If you're going to market somebody's property or a client's picture of doing a closing, you need to make sure you have their permission to do it. Now, again, this is very important, because these false, misleading, and ambiguous claims can mislead consumers to believe that you were involved in a transaction you weren't, that you have more experience and business presence than you actually do. And this could affect consumer decision-making, which violates licensing law. And when they cited the licensing law this violates, it's 4057-710, and get a load of this. Section 3, Section 4, Section 5, Section 20, Section 22, and 24. If you were to do this, you could wind up with 6 violations, and I need you to understand that each one of these violations are considered separately. Each one can have a separate fine. The minimum fine is $500. If you got hit for all 6, that would be $3,000 in fines. If they hit you for $1,000 per violation, that could be $6,000. You don't want to go in here violating these stuff. Let's just be real careful out there on how we market and advertise listings that are not yours. I know everybody wants to be creative and show all these really creative ways. Just be very careful what you're doing. If you're at all concerned that you're doing it the right way, ask your broker. Guys, that's what brokers are for. And then secondly, get permission. Most people are going to recognize value in that. And the only time they're going to say no typically is if it's just terrible quality video or people making negative comments or the pictures are really bad. But if you got really nice pictures or good quality videos, most people are going to want you to post that. So reach out and get that permission, put it in writing, but make sure you're getting permission. And secondly, make sure you're giving credit to the listing agent and listing your full brokerage as well. Got to make sure you're following the law on that. All right. I hope the Real Estate Commission's opinion here and their guidance has helped you a lot. To look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Dish and Dirt. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the #1 real estate podcast in South Carolina. Y'all take care.